Ma quello ci fa... Ah, quello ci fa da monitor. Ah,
Sì, sì, ci sono una serie di saluti preregistrati.
no, io credo che lì vedessi solo le slide, in realtà il monitor
No, no, è quello che vedranno tutti, immagino, quelli.
Ok,
Cioè,
allora questo lo lasciamo qua. Non lo tocco.
Quando vedrà la sua presentazione.
no, ma mi si appannano gli occhiali però con sta mascherina.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second European Week of Security. My name is Luca Guglielmi. I would like to thank the city of Turin and ENG Piemonte for giving me this role of moderator for the launch of this second European Week of Security. The very first European Week of Security took place last year in Nice within the European project Porte Sur. So today we're going to start a 5-day conference with 8 different working sessions. There will be 53 Italian and foreign participants. They are going to bring in their experience in many different sectors, down to urban security. This is a particular current topic. If you think, for example, that this project started in Nice on the occasion of the terrorist attack in July 2016, and then on occasion of Piazza Sankara event in Turin, the terrorist menace that struck the European cities in the last years, and the current pandemic threat. Well, according to the French press, these two threats are going hand in hand, and they make this project particularly important and interesting for such challenges that we need to tackle. If you think of that, both terrorism and pandemic are focusing on our role as citizens, the social contract, social cohesion, everything that is combining us. If we are scared of going into urban spaces, we're not citizens any longer. We are citizens because we go to the agora, not only the place where we go to, this is a place also where we debate, we discuss, and we face problems. Without security in such spaces, we'll have a real vulnus, an empty space in democracy. Therefore, the goals of such projects, that is to say, a standard strategy, standard procedures amongst all the different urban security stakeholders, so city police, decision makers, the academy, literature experts, technology experts, they all need to face this challenge concerning our democracy quality. In the following days, there will be a series of debates. There will be online debates. It goes without saying. You can all participate in it through the chat, and you can follow us on the website pactesurtorino.eur. I'd like just to say that this project started last year. The head of all the cities is Nice. Besides Turin and ENG Piemonte, we have also the city of Liège, and a very important European organism and institution that is also playing a very important role. This is the one that I also deal with. It is the network of urban security. This is a network made of different cities that share their best practices in order to tackle all the different urban security problems. Before giving the floor now to the institutional greetings by the representatives of this important European project, I'd just like to emphasize the important role of Europe. The European Union cannot only just step into security policies just in a very close way. The domestic affairs of a country are, of course, a task of a single country, but the European Union can also do a lot in terms of security, especially if we talk about safeguard. So, if the European Union just has some limitative powers in terms of security, it's because each single country has its own intelligence and its own methods, even in the fight against terrorism. Well, then we need all the different kinds of collaboration that we need. But then on the other side, we got the European Union that is been working quite a lot by making a big effort in fostering cooperation among the different urban cities. The urban tissue and the urban fabric needs to be enhanced as much as possible and needs to be equipped with the most suitable programs and tools in order to prevent and safeguard and to tackle any terrorist attack, any different kind of crisis, and also in order to face this kind of issues as a kind of response as well. Because if we lose resilience and social cohesion, and if we create polarization within the public opinion and in the society, this is really the worst that may happen in a particular critical context, just like right now in the pandemic. That's the conclusion of my introduction. I think there will be the institutional greetings by the Mayor of Turin, Chiara Appendino, that is in a video.
Good afternoon to all. I'm Chiara Appendino, the Mayor of Turin, and I wanted to virtually welcome you in our wonderful city. This year, unfortunately, due to the emergency, we cannot meet personally, but in some way I'm virtually saying you that you're really welcome in the future to come and visit our city. So thanks to our partnership cities, to Nizza and Liegi, for working with us the last year and the future years in tackling one of the most difficult challenges that we have. It has to do with security and making people feel secure in their urban contexts. Thanks to all the people that will participate and will tell us their experiences and share experiences, and I'm sure it will be an event that will help us, mayors, and thanks to the mayors that will participate, to tackle this so important issue. Thank you and bye-bye.
Bene.
Very well. There will be right now another two recorded greetings by Anthony Boré. This is the mayor of the city of Nice, with powers of security, administrative residence and urban policy of the city of Nice in France. Nice is the head of the Pacte de Sud project. The second greetings will be made by Bénédicte Billon on behalf of the Mayor of Liège, President of European Forum for Urban Security. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Anthony Boré. I am Vice Mayor of the city of Nice, with power of security. When I wanted to actually to greet the Mayor of Turin at the beginning of this European Week of Security. It's been organized by you this year, 1 year after the event in Nice. For me, it's a great pleasure to convey to you this message on behalf of the city of Nice and on behalf of the Mayor, Christian Esposi. The issue of security is of paramount importance for our country and for Italy and for Europe and for the whole world. Our mayor has been particularly committed since 2008 in security policies. He recruited 230 police agents. He developed new technologies, and he has particularly committed himself for future projects as well. And he has created a shared police station, shared by the city and the national police as a kind of point of reference in our country. We have also experienced very dramatic experiences. The attack in Nice, for example. I'd like to thank all of you. While today we are preparing our commemoration after 5 years of this strategy, I'd like to thank all the victims, and I'd like to thank you so much for your continuous and constant solidarity, particularly in these so sad moments for the whole city. Starting from that, we have drawn energy and force, and through this project we were able to share ideas and opinions We wanted the mayors to participate in such policies, even if in this country these are state-related powers and competencies. We tried to cooperate, and we tried to enable more different policies, and wanted to share very important reference points. I'd like to thank the city of Turin, the city of Liège, and its mayor, Willy de Meyer. I'd like to thank also the president of the European Forum for Urban Security. We were able to exchange on different issues. I'd like to thank also the region Piedmont. We shared opinions with the European Commissioner in the last years. He has particularly supported us on behalf of the Commission, support for our projects, and very recently, we have also then shared our opinions together with the new commissioner. We wanted to share with her different ideas. We wanted also to integrate into the European debate. We are very happy to be the head of the Pacte Sud project. Together with another 14 cities, we share different opinions and visions. We wanted to create and set up synergies concerning all the different problems we all know. I'd like also to thank and to greet all the different partnership and financial aspects of the Partners project. Thanks to the support of all partners and thanks to Julian King, we were able to get important funds for the security on the Promenade des Anglais that was completed 2 years ago. I'd like to also to thank you very much also for the different training center for security forces dedicated to Beltram, a very courageous coroner that was then killed by terrorists. All the different projects that were funded for Nice, and they own our country, they own the European Union. I would like to also to add that the exchange of opinions on different issues, just like terrorism or the health crisis, well, this does not neglect the fact that investigations and researches and many different studies are essential. And in this field, societies, metropoles, big cities do need to play a big important role so that the country is really supported in this very delicate mission. And of course, Europe can help us to give our support to the fight against radicalization and terrorism. And it's up to us, every one of us, to get informed on these topics, to share ideas, and also to defend our convictions. In Nice, we were able to get from the French government, from the Minister for Foreign Affairs, for Domestic Affairs, and from the Prime Minister, to have a new project so that the city police in a few weeks can get further skills in order to check on the identities, also to investigate on the vehicles, or maybe to have access to files they did not have access to according to the laws in force. This is a particular significant process that is going to concern Nice and, of course, another 3 or 4 different cities. We see here very important development of our country. This could be, of course, the subject matter of exchanges, debates, together with the other friends of the other European cities, so that each one of us can submit an idea and also can submit also the ideas to know how to work and to innovate. This is the goal of this work, of this conference, and on behalf of the mayor of Nice, on behalf of the city of Nice, I would like to wish a fruitful exchange that are going to support our governments. Bénédicte Biron, in charge of the Pacte Sud project for the city of Liège. Today I'm talking on behalf of the mayor of Liège. He is also the president of the European Forum for Security. He could not be here because of the health emergency. He's apologized for that. The city of Liège was struck twice in public spaces. The first time on December the 13th, due to a shooting in the heart of the city in Place Saint-Lambert at a rush hour, so at about midday. This attack caused 6 victims and also the same perpetrator as well that committed suicide on the spot. There were 300 injured people. That this was a particular stronger violence that concerned many different people, especially young one waiting for the bus. And then in May 2018, 2 young people and 1 police agent. The perpetrator, after screaming Allah Akbar, then committed suicide, and after the accident, everything was then managed according to the protocol for Paris attacks. The death of these young people and this young police agent have particularly concerned population, particularly because then the perpetrator was then in a school where there were children between 2.5 years of age and 18 years of age. Everything was particularly worrisome, just like in Paris and Brussels. After this attack in Liège, the city decided to strengthen security in public spaces. Awareness-raising attack that was then introduced for these protocols. So then we created another multidisciplinary commission together with the fire men and also the educational people, so that they could develop also a general policy in order to create security in public spaces. I can then, of course, then show you all these policies on Tuesday afternoon. This attack in Nice was a particular event that was a particular strike in Liège as well. So on Sunday, there's the biggest European market, open air with 300 different stands and stalls. And so every Sunday we got the opportunity to create security then on this market. The city of Liège is also welcoming different events on public spaces, and the facts in Liège and also abroad made us consider security. All these events have particularly impacted the police forces, and so we can then implement specific security protocols. The big challenge right now is then embedded in the isolated attacks with this hostile vehicle or with a knife, with a truck, for example. These are very difficult to prevent because they use daily tools, very easy to get to. They can rent a truck or maybe to steal it, and you can find a knife everywhere and anywhere. All these kinds of attacks can be perpetrated everywhere. The perpetrators do not want to make the highest number of victims, but they wanted to disseminate fear. We need, of course, to try also to tackle these problems, especially in these particular pandemic crisis. I'm thinking, for example, right now, of the help of the face recognition tools, or maybe I'm thinking of many different controls to prevent an attack, or maybe also to prevent any other consequences related to it. We need to be aware. This must be an automatism. The last challenge concerns communication. Local authorities need to develop the communication adapted to risks in this crisis. The population needs to understand all the different situations. Our network is working on urban security, and it also then gathering local and regional authorities in different cities impacted Sur, thanks to the work developed by the city and all different experts. So we have 200 different partners that can draw benefits from security in public spaces. This network has furthermore the goal to exchange on different experiences and to enhance European partnership. I'd like to do something, but before introducing Mr. Andrea Corsaro, I'd like to agree with our guests on our solidarity for the victims in Liège. When there's a terrorist attack in a European city, the whole of Europe is then struck. I'd like to remind you that starting from 40 casualties and 160 injured in Nice. There were many different nationalities, amongst which also 4 Italians. I'm going to give now the floor to the mayor of Vercelli. He's also a professor at the University of Piemonte Orientale. Starting from 2019, he's been president of ENG, Italian Association of Italian Communities, for the Piedmont session. He has dialed in, and I'm going to give him the floor. I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to greet all of you, to the mayor of Turin. I'd like to thank also the representative of the mayor of Nice and Liège, and also the representatives of the other 11 cities that are sharing this project. This project considers ENG as a partner of the Pacte Sur project. And for sure, this project that has been funded by the Internal Fund for Security by the European Union, this is a project that ENG wanted to share and to participate in because of the significance of this project. So because we can give the partners and the Piedmontese municipalities a support to foster and to promote a particular security policy participation. The Piedmontese communities have particularly participated, as we heard. We heard this call for this dramatic events that took place in this above-mentioned cities. Each one of us has this kind of sensitiveness to understand how city administrators have been ready to share initiatives thanks to ENG. And we wanted to participate in the European Week of Security, and that's why I'd like to thank also the president, the director Orlando, and also Mrs. Elena Charlo. We wanted to be available for the Piedmontese municipalities. Large cities just like Nice and Liège and the big metropoles are highly probable to be attacked by terrorists. But on the other side, we have many other different towns, smaller ones and less important, do host important events. And then we'll have visitors coming in numbers, and so there will be then many different events during the whole year, and then have to tackle the same problems, even if they do not have the same devices and different facilities, just like a big city. So they have to develop their new security strategies. Imagine, for example, this large fairs, for example, the wine fair. Imagine, for example, our art cities with art fairs. Imagine, for example, the Piedmontese cities and towns with this cement and concrete facilities that are, of course, not combining with this high culture areas. The city of Turin was able to cover these concrete blocks in Piazza Castello with very beautiful images that people can enjoy. But there are some situations where the disposals and the different provisions can prevent us from doing that. So all the different rules sometimes are very stringent. After this event in Piazza San Carlo in Turin, of course, we have received some more constraints that sometimes that are not making us able to carry out any different people's fairs, even in small towns. They are particularly exposed to some fairs and some particular events. So we need to consolidate this culture of security. It goes without saying, it's true what the other representatives of the cities just said. It's the central government that needs to deploy its own full powers. But on the other side, we need also to act immediately and specifically on a single city. We heard that Nice had a possibility to receive some particular powers. We need to strengthen administrations and city powers, and we need to also to face this kind of possibilities so that our city administrators, can feel closer to their citizens, and they can create also experiences, and they can exchange together with some other territories. That's why Anci Piemonte wanted to be very close to towns, municipalities, partners, and we develop here a culture of space protection. Here we need to share protocols. We need to carry out training courses. In December, there will be the representatives of local polices that are going to attend these training courses, aiming at prevention, aiming at safeguard, aiming at fostering participation. And they will also then consider the large risks that such important large cities can face, especially in very serious situations, as we heard. Of course, we need to compare the current situation, this kind of debate on the powers of the mayors to close down streets and squares due to COVID-19. Of course, this legislation is talking about urban centers, so this will be in the hands of mayors. It's already in the hands of mayors in many different other cases. The problem is that sometimes these kind of provisions are not certain and not so clear. In the last decree, we didn't hear or we didn't read the word mayors, but actually it's clear that it's up to us mayors to work on urban centers. We need to exchange opinions. We need to be prepared right from the start. We need to have a prevention that is not just focused on knowledge, on possibilities, options, and the way to step in particular events, but we need to have a real structure so that with suitable protocols we can train all the different operators and local administrators in order to foster a security approach, and also by focusing on spaces, public spaces, and people's participation. I think that this week will be fruitful and will be enriched by other cities' experiences that will give us a guideline on how to proceed, on how to work, and just because we will know much more about the risks and will be much more aware of the different remedies and strategies against it, so that everything can also happen and take place the best way it could. I wish you all the best and thank you all. And we are following all these conferences during this week. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Mr. Andrea Corsaro, Mayor of Turin. We thank you. We're going to close this first opening session on the first European Week of Security, and I'm going to give the floor now to Emiliano Bezzon, that has been then the chief of local police in the city of Turin, and I think that it is going to give us then a particular insight. We have mentioned very often this Pacte Sur project. Is going to focus particularly on it. This is, of course, the subject matter of this week, and it also then in many other occasions. I'd like to give you the floor, Chief of Police. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you so much for giving me the floor and giving me this great opportunity. I have seen right from the beginning of this project. I remember the very first designing meetings together with our NIS colleagues. At that moment, this was a great opportunity exchange for best practices, for key strategies. Sharing is one of the key messages of the Pacte Sur projects. Sharing skills, competencies, knowledge, powers in many different areas. For the three cities belonging to this project, Liège, Nice, and Turin, and also for the other 11 cities that have then joined us, that are following us on this very important pathway. Last year, we had a very important academy phase that we're going to see in a little bit. And this year, there will be then the second academy phase. And next year, everything will also take place, aiming at growing together with synergies with the community in the prevention, the safeguard, preventing terrorism. In this phase, we have a totally different enemy. The pandemic emergency has particularly shifted the focus of institutions and population on this topic. That's why we're much more vulnerable. This has been shown by the above-mentioned events. We have to raise the bar of attention, and one of the goals of this security project is to keep our focus high on other topics. Well, not only the pandemic, but also some other very important security-related issues. The problem is to consider and to share all the different strategies in order to face attacks, but also threats by terrorism. We're not only talking about the real action phase, as we have already seen this causes problems, but also the phase of threat or terrorist threat through, for example, the communication tools, social media, or different channels of these extremists, no matter what their ethnicity and their religion is, use to disseminate this kind of terror communication. How can cities tackle these criticalities? Cities, as we heard by the chairman, by the president of ENG Piemonte, where the large cities have are more equipped because they have more tools. What are the referring tools they can use to face this threat? Pacte Sur has this ambition to strengthen, to reinvigorate competencies and skills, not only from the cultural and operational point of view, but also the structural potentials of cities in order to face this problem. This is not an emergency right now, but is anyhow a problem that we need always to consider and to focus on. What do we want to do with Pacte Sur in concrete terms? We have 4 different axes, 4 different goals. They are all anyhow then coordinated and related with another. The first was definition of standards, regulations, and security protocols, which means a regulatory framework. We represent countries that belong to the European Union, but have many different regulatory frameworks and systems. It's of significant importance to exchange of that and to give our best to give the mayors and also local administrators the best tools. The mayor was mentioned then, for example, the trade unions provisions. And so we think this is a very strong tool, something that we can really use. We have to target it on specific goals. And then we have also development of training courses for local security operators. Here too, we need to exchange amongst different countries participating in the project. Our police system probably is the more complex, is the more articulated. But we need particularly to train local police authorities in the different cities. And then we also need to implement tools to enhance citizens' awareness. I'm referring to the current pandemic, then I will stop with the pandemic. Well, you have to know how much are we working on information? A lot, very much. Sometimes even it's a bit of a stretch, a bit too much. We do not to generate panic and tensions beyond all the necessary terms. But it's very important that the citizens also play an important role by sticking to correct behaviors. For example, when they participate in large events. We have already experienced that before. We were referring to the tragic events that took place in our city without referring to any terrorism, but related to big mass events. From that moment, we have learned how to behave much better in large events, and accidents decreased dramatically. And last but not least, but we need to help local administrations to implement more investments in infrastructures in the city or in parts of the cities. We'll see physical infrastructures and facilities, and then there will be also some others, just like here in Turin, technology or some other important topics. And then we have then the importance of laws, provisions, protocols, operational protocols. Everything is useful. If you think that we face this kind of emergency only with one of these goals, well, just infrastructures, this is not enough. Training is not enough alone. Development of regulatory tools are not enough alone. So Pacte Sur is an incubator, is a developer of best practices, of guidelines, information, skill and growth tools on all these topics. How? Thanks to the academy. We referred to the Nice experience last year. There will be also then probably next year the Turin Academy. We hope we can set it up, even if we've got this kind of criticalities because of this pandemic. But then there will be then the final academy in Liège 2021. But then we have also to show security so that the different police agents and representatives in this kind of academies can really touch the different security tools concretely.
Here we have the structure of the Pacte Sur program. It is not necessary for me to comment it. There are participants and other cities and all that we are going to do. The academies, one of the most important things that we said is the training, operational training of police. For each city, we choose 5 local police forces that participated on the first phase of the academy in Nice. And we are waiting for the second academy year in Turin, and we will conclude in Liège next year, hopefully. But aside from this, there are other workshops for citizens. We set this among the different targets of the project. There's that of raising awareness of every citizen, and for them is there are workshops of more. We need to raise awareness for citizens. This is what happened in Nice last year. So we can pass it. What will happen in Turin instead, we hope we will spend a few words, is technological installations in the most important squares of the city. The biggest ones in the European context was infrastructures with high technology cameras, and this will help the academy to live and handle security management on the floor through simulators. So without any physical risk, the vision and the participation and the management of a terroristic event or a terrorist threat would link to a big event through the simulation and the use of visors. This is what we're going to do with the collaboration of our local excellencies like the Politecnico. In Liège, we will doing more physical training that will concern the handling of an intervention in a building that we need to set free. As we said, another goal, an opportunity offered from Pactusor is that of evaluate and visit and know the different installations, the installation that each city is developing or has developed. The first is the one in Nice. We all know what tragically happened, and they realized this installation, which is very, very interesting because it is infrastructure for the protection of big urban places at high resistance. So it's clear that the goal is to resist to an impact of attacks and protect differently from what happened other cities, so to protect cyclists and people on the street. There are very light infrastructures and compatible with the space, but they have a strong resistance to attack. This is the experience in Nice. We talked about Turin. Aside from the exercises, we will have cameras to monitor big events on the squares and observe movements inside and outside the squares throughout sensors, as well as new technologies such as facial recognition, with the possibility to use both fixed cameras and drones with high technology facial recognition. What will happen in Liège is still on work, so we'll see next year, next month, an experience that will happen in 2021. So they will prepare it, and this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for giving me this space. Thank you very much. I would ask if Corsaro is still on the line and if wants to intervene in some way with Betson. Otherwise, we will close this first part. Here I am. So what was underlined from Button throughout this presentation of this project that allows cities to structure cities, more competences and a study of the security strategy of public areas, but also, as we said, for small cities, the underlining of citizen sensibilization. It was precise to underline this, and I think that aside from protocols and interventions and the police force trainings, it's both for terrorism and the new emergency concerning COVID-19. I think it's fundamental in a project like this one, and we give another possibility, especially on raising awareness for the citizens. It's fundamental to prepare strategies that are common, and also from what we learned from the dramatic experiences in Nice. We need to invest a lot in this. Also on the rallies that could be in our municipalities for just a few days per year. I think about the big fairs that host 100,000 people or 50,000 in a few days, or the necessity to organize structures that aren't just like buses or the way we organize cities. There is a common strategy and common protocols and exchange of news on formation for the operators and awareness raising for citizens. This is what was underlined by Chief Commander and what I want to underline as well, because it is fundamental in the culture and the knowledge of what could be the risks and the necessity to structure the plan's disposition of security. We are asked to modify our everyday routine, especially in big events. Everything has changed caused by these dramatic events. And so it is important that citizens know, just like the event of the Promenade des Anglais or San Carlos Square here in Turin. I keep on saying that because it is something that we all have to face. And and we have to understand that we have to teach and to learn from the experiences and give a fundamental contribution to this European Security Week. Thank you. Yes, I would like to close this section by saying that another fundamental point of your presentation will be important in this Security Week, and it's the problem of communication and risk assessment, whether it is terrorism or pandemic. As you mentioned, it is difficult and it's a slippery floor to underestimate or excessively alarm the citizens. But this is the lesson that we have learned from San Carlos Square. That is how different is the perception of risks for citizens. I can't have a WhatsApp message that tell me what happened in San Carlos Square, but 5-10 minutes passed with the idea that it could have been a terrorist attack. We shouldn't forget that a week earlier on the Tower Bridge in London, there was a terrorist attack. And so in that moment, the alert was, in all, even citizens, was quite high. So this aspect of communication, as well as the citizens involving us, should be two key points on which, from next session, we should talk about it more with the other guests. For now, thank you for the attention and see you later. Mi sente? Perfetto.
Ma io non devo, cioè, rispondo eventualmente a domande io, giusto?
Dibattiti, no, anche entrare nel dibattito.
Anche inserirsi per farlo non è un problema. Sostanzialmente il concetto è tenere 2 ore, se ho ben capito.
Sì,
Molto
noi
bene.
manager di Amnesty.
Io posso recitarvi la Divina Commedia a memoria.
Perfetto.
Quando dite quando devo partire.
Welcome back to the second week of security. In these next few hours, we will talk about two main themes: the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic and the terroristic phenomenon, as well as political experiences and of innovation in security, in urban security. On the first theme, we have as guest Edoardo Mattiello, expert of ANCI Piemonte for security teams. He has long experience in armed forces, studied law, and is a consultant for municipalities in security matters. And he is also a security manager for Amnesty International. If the slides are ready, I would leave immediately the floor to him. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for being here virtually and in person. It is an honor for me, and I want to give this presentation. And particularly, I want to thank two people that collaborated with me, Dr. Ciarletta and Dr. Lorenzetti. We developed together the results of these analyses referring to terrorist threat concerning COVID-19. They contributed in a fundamental way, so I want to thank them. Basically, in the last period, although I worked on different kinds of threats, especially terroristic, we never heard about terrorism aside the last period with the French fact. This is because we had the pandemic that that involved the medias. Media's only talked about pandemic. This might have given us the idea that terrorism disappeared with pandemic, but it's not true. But the fact is, we just don't talk about it because we had other priorities. I want to underline a few things and correlations between COVID and terrorism that I believe are extremely important. First of all, terrorism wants to create terror through acts of violence. The strategic goal of terrorism is that of obtain politic change through the change in perception of the security among citizens. In other words, it wants to create terror. So the victims of terrorist attacks are instrumentalized to create terror. They are not the final goal. With that, I mean that the terrorist wants to obtain, and he obtains normally, security awareness level degrowth. What I mean is that people are more scared. Professionally, I evaluate the different risks of companies that work abroad for the kind of consulates I do, and sometimes I find myself to reassure the travelers that they won't undergo a terrorist attack while they travel to countries such as Brazil, where the risk due to microcriminality is higher if compared to a terrorist attack. In this context, we can see the efficacy of terrorism, which act on security perception. rather than its deterioration. If we face COVID-19 has created a general perception of insecurity about future, insecurity with interpersonal relationships, insecurity about information, and we will face this theme later on. It is unthinkable for us that this phenomenon wasn't noticed by terroristic organizations that, based on this perception of security by citizens, base their strategies. Another point that is correlated, that finds correlations between terrorism and COVID, is the polarization. We will see later on with Professor Guglielmini what it means. The terrorist, in its modus operandi, wants to create contrasts. That is to say, it wants to put people one against each other, black people against white people, or one religion against the other, and so on and so forth. It creates an intentionally polarization, and it worsens them. Each terrorist organization has its own policy, but this is a common ground. COVID-19 has created new grounds. Those who wear masks, those who don't, those who don't respect the lockdown, those who do, the ills, the signs, and so on and so forth. This is an operative context for a terrorist that could be used tactically and physically to act in certain ways that we'll see later. Another important characteristic of terrorism that was rediscovered, or better say, developed, is the ability to communicate. The ability to communicate with the goal to modify the perception of security. What does it mean? It means Daesh, in a structured manner, wanted to develop certain campaigns to install terror and to recruit. The COVID-19 had created for citizens the knowledge and awareness of how important is communication in an emergency period. Personally, I remember that the few moments of lockdown, I was submerged by a series of news on hospitals that would be collapsed in a few hours, or remedies on COVID. So the problem, the concrete problem of fake news, I don't want to say that all the news I received were fake, but surely some were. And these were not given with the language and with the right language. This, as we will discuss about it, this might have created in the citizens a strong perception of insecurity, of what the actual situation is. For example, say, I don't understand, or if we misunderstand what we are being told, if we see through the lens of our fears. A terrorist that operates in a certain manner, just like Daesh, So it publicates and explains to its followers how to move and how to strike. It's unthinkable that an organization like this don't know how to take advantage of the communication aspects. I think I'm talking about Daesh, but we will talk about other terrorists of extreme right, extreme left. My intervention will be all around. I'm thinking about Daesh as the first, as point, because it is the most well-known. And he had done a series of activities that are quite known. Another topic, we could say that COVID is a weapon of mass distraction. I'm not trying to correct a mistake. I didn't want to say mass destruction. It's mass distraction. In the sense that the resources of the different governances and politics of all the world were all be used to handle the emergency, this pandemic emergency. So the terrorist phenomenon was set aside, or could be set aside almost everywhere. In the second part of the presentation, we will see that in Mozambique are new COVID-19 spreading, where terrorist organizations that are affiliated to Daesh have begun violent attacks to take control of the territory. New attacks in Iraq have risen, and lately new events in France.
COVID-19.
So at this point, the COVID-19 is an inspiration for many different biologic attacks. So what I'm saying here as an expert, so for me this is a particularly personal viewpoint. Well, I have to say that for sure the terrorists may have understood, thanks to the different disasters produced by the pandemic, that a biologic attack can be really efficient. However, we knew that in the past as well. We knew that the biological attack can have also very negative effects. In the past, we already prevented and thwarted also some particular chemical or potential biological attacks. The pandemic currently may have then shifted the focus of potential terrorists on potential biologic attacks. And this is, of course, de facto. However, a very significant point to stress out is that a terrorist right now does not need to implement any biologic effect or attack. They wouldn't have to say it. Daesh and the right-wing movements have circulated messages on the social media where they have fostered their followers to cough on doors, on door handles, on people, on police officials and officers. This is what I wanted to say. In a pandemic, if we got a police agent suffering from COVID, this is, of course, quite significant, but this is not so significant as a knife attack, But this kind of threat circulated on social media, where the perception plays the most important part in the communication, well, this changes quite a lot our operational efficiency in preventing this kind of threat. This is the way I see this biological attack. Daesh, and not only Daesh, has circulated messages according to which the COVID patients, COVID suffering people should also then try to spread this pandemic, but do not know if this is a real concrete pandemic, because once the pandemic has been solved, this means that even if you are suffering from any different kind of disease, then this is going to be solved quite easily. However, so within this context, this is quite a significant message. Another very important point, and we are going back to communication right now. Well, we have been just talking about terrorist menaces and threats. This is a real threat, not a real fact. This is something else. This does not mean that this may cause big problems. COVID-19 may be seen as an opportunity to find new followers. And what have we seen during the last months? Of course, population stayed at home during all lockdown periods. And during this period of different terrorist responses by the extreme right movements, with slogans just like "immigration kills," or with many different kinds of slogans, race-based slogans or xenophobic messages, well, they have impacted people that were particularly scared by COVID-19. They were much more on social media, and they did not know what the real information was. Down to immigration, if immigration was really causing real risks of infection. We did not know if the new refugees landing in Italy may have a risk increase or not. Well, within this framework, this kind of propaganda was particularly well embedded, and we saw that many different terrorist movements or extreme ideologies have increased their followers from hundreds to thousands. And this is another very important and significant message. We've been talking about Daesh as a main reference point for jihadism, but this is what we normally see in the press. This is something that we particularly hear around us in the media. The propaganda concept of COVID as a kind of ally of Daesh. They say basically that COVID was sent by God, by Allah, to fight against all those who do not believe in Allah and all those who need to be destroyed. So the concept is that an enemy of my enemy is my friend. This is a very concrete and pragmatic vision. This is absolutely denied by another action by Daesh. They produced a brochure, and they said they told their followers. Those who are infected in infected countries, please stay there in your infected countries. Do not come back to us, because the Daesh ally is particularly scared, is particularly seen as a kind of fear by Daesh. And we have here an example of this brochure where basically there's an invitation to restrain mobility, and they will give also some advice based on the World Health Organization. We have a typical hygiene guidelines, so for example, to wash your hands, to keep the social distancing, and so on. And so we see that pandemic had also a very strong impact. From my point of view, this had also an impact on our operational aspect. Why? Because the migrating mujahideens has always been there as a kind of issue. So the mujahideens going from one territory to the other one, conveying new techniques, fighting in a place and then fighting in a different place, a routine coming back from a war-stricken country, coming back to Europe, and that this will represent a menace. Even if we know that statistically the returnees that have performed attacks do just represent a minority. However, within this context, we have a restriction of the international mobility due to the COVID-19, and Daesh itself tells its affiliates, please stay where you are. This may be considered by all those who perform analysis to see, for example, if we have maybe then attacks by people that have been naturalized European or maybe have been living in Europe for a long time, or maybe then the risk of people that have come from outside in order to perpetrate attacks. Just like all different risks, this may not be excluded, and I think this is, however, less likely. We're not talking about certainties, we're just talking about likelihood. This is purely and merely personal analysis. If we come back to terrorist threat, so if we go back to the way we speak and not the way we act, the way how this menace is perceived than a menace itself, well, we'll see the so-called Zoom bombing. What is this Zoom bombing? What happens if once a terrorist or maybe, a perpetrator got into a school and then maybe he would throw then hatred flyers. This does not mean that they are terrorists, but this, of course, may generate a very strong social tension. Well, now, when the whole education, but not only education, also a large portion of the social life is then centered and focused on video conferences, what has terrorism done? From the viewpoint of cybersecurity, and during this week there will be also a particular focus on cybersecurity. Well, from the point of view of cybersecurity, they started to get into Zoom videos, Zoom conferences, in order to send extremist messages. So we had, for example, some cases in Germany and in the USA of this kind of incursions during lectures or maybe during video lessons. So there were right-wing movements. They showed swastikas, or maybe they showed Hitler's pictures when they were talking, for example, about the Shoah, or maybe we were talking about then minority rights protection. Now, let's come to a more typically operational concept. So if I say typically operational correct, this is not so 100% correct. Everything that I have said so far is operational, but is then menace-centered, so on the psychological point of view. Here now we see the Daesh movement identifying new targets. These new targets have been also then analyzed from a psychological point of view. What does Daesh tell its followers to target all different pandemic symbols? So hospitals, so the test COVID points, maybe supermarkets as well. So what is the logic behind that? In a general uncertain situation, if we target the symbols of security in the fight against pandemic, well, this goes without saying that this may have a very strong psychological impact. Imagine, for example, if during the lockdown period, so when everybody was staying at home, if there had been a supermarket attack by a man equipped with just a knife, killing or maybe injuring 3 people. This would have been so significant. However, in that context, this causes particular problems from the point of view of perception of security. This is, of course, much more relevant than in normal times, much more relevant, much more concrete and real than if that happened outside the pandemic period. So once again, we have to focus on such messages. They convey messages of insecurity, of uncertainty. This is not just done by chance. This does not mean that the new attacks will be all then focused on these potential targets. But this means that these have been added to the list. As an expert, again, I'd like to say that in the past I've never identified hospitals as particular risk-stricken areas, especially for terrorist attacks. There have been some in the past abroad, but this was not a prevailing part. During the pandemic, now we have much more focus on that. And then here, as you can see, I have integrated all the conspiracy movements. I do not consider them terrorists, but because not many of them are terrorists, but as I was saying, they may be then exploited by all those who may have terrorist intentions. How come? Because when a movement is gathering particular fears that they are based or less based, for example, just like the 5G, just the concept of wearing, not wearing a mask, this can be instrumentalized by all those who want to use these actions for some other goals. And this is another very strong risk that we need to tackle. This comes down to manipulation of communication through fake news by people with terrorist intentions. But this is not particularly related to terrorist movements, but by those who are then influencing such movements. Another problem, well, maybe another point we need to consider, this was something that we already had before the pandemic, is the one related to the returnees, so the foreign fighters that go back to their origin countries. We know there are some European countries, but they're not the only ones, where there are foreign fighting problems, quite strong ones. For example, France, Belgium, Denmark. These are the most important countries, but they are not the only ones, of course. What's the problem right now? The problem is that Daesh that has recruited up to 40,000 foreign fighters in the golden times, let's say. And this is a kind of basin catchment of people. Almost 8,000 of them came from Europe, according to some sources. So these are people, these are foreign fighters that are able to fight, are able to implement complex actions. And now, with their potential, and I see and I repeat, just the potential decline of Daesh, because we're not talking about a decline of Daesh. Well, they are now, of course, not so much devoted to this subject matter, but they are still linked with this ideology. If these people came back to Europe, they would need to be organized and managed. And this will be a problem that we need to understand and to manage. Parallelly, we need to remember that this year many different people should have been set free from jail due to a particular amnesty for terrorist actions. This is a particular criticality because basically there haven't been any releases. Some of the most important events that have taken place in the last period. I just want to say something. If I refer to Daesh, I wanted to say, I talked about a Daesh decline, but actually this term is not correct from my point of view. We can talk about a troubled period because, yes, Daesh in 2017 lost control on the Iraqi territory, and therefore it's turning back to a terrorist movement without any territory, trying to claim a kind of nationality. Nevertheless, in that moment, that period, it happened that Daesh started to change its strategy. For the time being, what's now Daesh's strategy? Well, to get into many different illicit trafficking actions in order to finance its activities through guerrillas, for example, in order to make its enemies tired and exhausted, in order to exhaust all of them. You see that this exhausting action is then perpetrated through fear. This kind of uncertainty that is then instilled, not a real damage. It's much more a fear. Anyhow, we see that during our lockdown period and also later, there has been a series of events that has shown us that terrorism was there. Some of these events were particularly significant. For example, let's think of Mozambique on March 23rd. Mozambique is quite a new context. Mozambique is new to terrorism. We haven't heard so much about Mozambique. There was an attack by the Al-Sunna movement. This is a local terrorist movement that, starting from March, it has commenced a terrorist campaign in order to acquire territory with huge gas reserves and rubies mines, very large ones. You can see here a series of events. There was an attack on Kisanga on March 23rd. The population fled. The population from Mocimboa da Praia and Kisanga, and then they had to flee to some other areas. And then again on April the 8th, once again, a further attack. Here there was a bloodbath. blood was shed, and 52 people, young people, did not want to get recruited by al-Sunnah, affiliated to Daesh, and since they rejected, they all were killed and beheaded. So these are extremely fearful events. Let's go over to Iraq. An increase in attacks, more and more attacks, some other attacks now in Mozambique. And let's come over to Italy. We see here an increase of social tensions due to extreme right-wing protests, and then some other events in Mozambique. We go on in chronological order. This is June, and then August in Germany. Extreme right protests. We have 300 people that got arrested. In France, on September 25th, an attack on the Charlie Hebdo headquarters. We see now that in France there has been another attack recently. A teacher was killed by extremists. And then we see many different right-wing movements. What's the future in terms of threats? So rudimentary attacks in Europe as well, against hospitals and against places representing the pandemic. Why rudimentary attacks? Because there's not so much international mobility, so it's quite unlikely to have a foreign fighter coming from outside. Rudimentary attacks, as I said, so it can be then those who cough on police agents, on doctors, on physicians. Things that happened, for example, in the USA, people were then arrested. Then we have Zoom bombing and attacks on social media. Then fake news dissemination in order to generate panic. And then Zoom bombing attacks, so during video conferences or video lectures, in order to generate fear and uncertainty in communication. And then during the week, we're going to focus on this second part on cybersecurity. How are we going to manage everything? We need to keep our attention very high, very focused. We need to be resilient. We need also to overcome this period and trying to be as strong as possible and trying to stay together and cooperate on different levels, not only from the viewpoint of repression, but also from the psychological and communicational aspects and points of view. This is essential. Why? This is a very complex phenomenon. Thank you. Thank you very much, Eduardo. Thank you so much for your presentation. So, in conclusion, you mentioned complexity. It's a very relevant and very significant topic. You gave us a very exhaustive framework of the different menaces and threats within pandemic. I think that we have also the chance to talk about that, to consider all these aspects, but we needed to put it off to the following sessions, so that we're on Wednesday, in the Wednesday session, because we had to stick to the timetable. And so if the other guests also agree on that, we maybe then can ask questions at the end of the debate. I'm going to give the floor now to Michele Pianetta. He is the Vice Mayor of Villanova di Montovi, Vice President of ENG, with the powers of innovation and urban security. As I was saying, this is the other topic that we need to deal with today in the afternoon. And so without any further ado, I'm going to give the floor to the Vice Mayor Pianetta. As President Corsaro just said this morning, as we heard in introduction, the role of ENG through the Pacte Sur projects, a particular significance of paramount importance. So this is a particular development in favor of the municipalities. It's also then a platform for initiatives, especially for all the different employees of the public administration, also for our administrators. Sometimes, as I was saying before, I agree with Mr. Mattiello, because when you talk about conspiracy, you have seen them in different topics, just like 5G. On the innovation, we need, of course, to focus on 5G. This is a particular urgent, first and foremost, because there's a particular connection with the skills and competencies by the politicians and the administrators. When we talk about administration, for example, with public administration, we have, of course, to face a skill gap. There are no skills, so we need to have a deep dive in such skills, and we have also then some anographic difficulties in the public administration in Italy. You know that the age in public administration is very high, but there's no generational change, and sometimes it's not really then implemented and fostered. So we have two different problems. So on one side, we have, of course, then the impression that this is just a nerd issue. So it means that it's very hard to explain administration how it is important, for example, to have electronic post communication. Imagine then 5G. The problem is that you do not know, and the problem is that you do not to face it. There's a particular significant data that is particularly also related to today's topic. So this is the provisions by mayors as for the 5G. You know, then in the last 6 months there have been provisions by the mayors where the administrations were imposing the big telecoms not to experiment on the territories on a kind of symmetry that was not actually then supporting this theory, because they thought this experiment in such territory was then making people sick. This was not true. This was not an experiment. And second, this was a measure that was then approved by the higher health institution in Italy. We have to think that sometimes there's a knowledge by the public administrators that do not know what was going to happen. On one side, we were engulfing so the public administration and all the different verdicts by the TAR, so by the administrative courts, were also showing all that. Last week, we have seen that in the last 2 weeks, there have been less provisions by the mayors compared to the previous months. I say all that because on innovation in general, on making available skills, competencies, and tools on anti-terrorism, we have also to focus and to finance all the different digital skills of the public administration. We know that this is something very important. The mayors cannot decide on topics that do not know, but on the other side, we know that if we have a governmental body that something is feasible, it cannot be a local administration that stops it. On the other side, we are also then facing a structural difficulty in public administration. Look, I'm coming from a province, Cuneo, and we know very well the situation. We know, for example, Collisioni, the festival, that is a huge, very large situation in a very small municipality, in Barolo. It's a bit larger, Barolo, because if you think that within the 1,240 municipalities in Piedmont, there are many that have more than 1,000 inhabitants. It's not so big, but it's not so small. So if we needed to install sensors or maybe also some devices so that the operators can work in the right way, so we have the difficulty and the trouble everywhere in the municipality to have a real cell phone signal. So how can we talk about innovation if we're not having a phone signal? And looking at Mr. Bezzoli, the chief of the Turin police, that has done particular things in Turin, together also with the population. So we have to think that the territory of our region with two different speeds, two totally different speeds, because sometimes the legislator, and I say that with a self-criticism, that the Piedmont region stops at the roundabout Maroncelli. For all those who do not know this situation, it's the roundabout that divides the city of Turin from the rest of Piedmont. So we have two different situations. It was the legislation that perceived this situation as two equal realities, but they are not, absolutely not. If we consider them, treat them the same way, so we are not considering the right things. On innovation, I think we need to speed up. This is quite important, because if you think from a structural point of view, the broadband needs to be then also spread and disseminated on territory, but we have also to make the legislators at a regional or local or national level understood that we have a particular situation to face. I say that because in the last days there have been finally some resources to have done an increase of rural demands. What does it mean? It means that the broadband areas, people can get resources in order to activate some connectivity subscriptions. This is only possible, according to the national legislator, only through the cable technology, without knowing or maybe forgetting that in many different places in Piedmont, or in the most of small towns in our country, there's no cable technology. That's why we wanted to, of course, foster innovation, and we need to have then policies that are suitable for those situations. This is a very particular aspect I wanted to stress out.
Diceva bene.
As I was saying, we should realize what we're asking to a public administration, so that what they can do. On the security matters, we should invest on competences and do not take decisions where in things that do not compete us. For instance, on actuality, in reference to yesterday's law, in which municipalities were obliged to decide whether a situation was dangerous or not. But first of all, I think we should allow public administrators to take their responsibilities but step aside where they shouldn't be. Thank you. Thank you to you. I'm thinking about this aspect linked to technology gaps are extremely problematic today, especially today where we need online schooling, and we find ourselves with a generational gap inside the public administration and conspiracy theories that tell us that we don't know what 5G damages could be. It's frankly quite an absurd situation, because we accumulate paradoxes that are very problematic. Is there any observation, any questions on what we were saying now? I have something to say. I totally agree with everything I heard from now, but I was referring especially on Vice President intervention. Today, when we talk about security, we talk about technology. Maybe too much, because we risk believing that through technology implementation we can solve all of our problems. I can see it from the questions from citizens. Do I put a camera here or there? So as if the camera works, the effect is that of a complete resolution of problems, not only of real security, but also of perceived security in a territory. Aside from this aspect that should be more thought of from all security actors, I have to underline another critical point. We usually find an inadequacy of juridic aspects because the local police operator wants to invest in new technologies for security, and it has to face juridic restrictions that do not. And there are many contradictions in this because different authorities might find themselves in problems. I will give you a few examples. In the city of Turin, I say from this Maroncelli side, there was a generalized public security that was mentioned for the Olympic 15 years ago. But for us, using a drone for observation activities has become very, very complex and requires complex acquirement of state policy and so on and so forth, because there's a juridic apparatus that is not adequate. I don't want to be alarmed, but we have a problem because for example, the installation of surveillance cameras were very enhanced by Miniti laws that I don't think were actualized anywhere yet. Sometimes finds themselves against the privacy management, because today the installation of surveillance systems that are a very useful tool, although do not resolve the problems, face juridic apparatus that is not adequate, and we all think it's very, very invasive, like a Big Brother situation in this Orwellian vision that we let ourselves be scared by cameras installed in a square near our house without knowing that whenever we use a certain fidelity card of our supermarket, we're much more controlled. And this is one of the goals of Pactusur, to increase security culture in citizens, not only in operators, so that whenever we want to actuate projects, we don't have to face. We can have a collective interest. Thank you, Dr. Mattiello. Any observation before the next intervention? I want to say that the commander is right. As he told, it's fundamental, the security and cooperation among citizens. Technology doesn't resolve every problem, but at the same time, it's extremely important and needs to be well known and used. It also represents an increasing risk because of the cyber menacing. Aside from rights and fundamental freedoms, the cyber menacing is a point that we should all keep in mind, because I think lockdown has underlined the importance of cyber world. I say this for citizens in general. The camera control needs to be protected. But I completely agree. I think it's fundamental the involvement of the citizenship with the right with the right awareness. We don't need to transform citizens in policemen, but there should be an awareness raising of security and a certain way to reduce marginalization, and at the same time a much more awareness of risk potential that could help those who work and intervene. I would like to add two concepts. We do not solve everything with technology, and we remember that the attackers of 9/11 had a small knife and nothing much. But at the same time, we shouldn't involve citizens more than necessary. I think about London after the attack of 2004, when the Metropolitan Police found rallies where they invited citizens to actively participate and instillate a paranoid thought. Because if it is done by security forces who know how to handle this, it's okay. But if it is on a pandemic, if there's alarming excessive, it's wrong. With this 2 points, we can switch on to the next intervention. I would like to say something more. In recent years, I had a chance to know the Scottish police, and I saw them having in my point of view, a quite valid approach for what concerns citizens. So I think they are very, very prepared, and they enacted different interaction policies between local police and citizens, for instance. So I just wanted to compliment with them, because sometimes there could have been excesses. I don't know. I know that in the United States, in certain moments, citizens have been used, not policemen, to handle waves of crowds of people with a series of risks. So it's a very delicate theme, as you were saying. Absolutely. Talking about England, one of the debates is that in England, their prevention program on terrorist threats that intervene in all their educational system, both schools and universities, that risk on making teachers sort of controllers of the ideas, because it's not only on radicalization, compartmental radicalization, behavioral, but also ideological aspects. We talk about Mahatma Gandhi's schools. It's a bit of a paradox that a century later, teachers are sort of controllers. So I can say the student Mattiello has extremist theories. He is not violent, but his ideas are, and so it's an extremely delicate matter, and we should always be aware of that. So, along this, in this session that links different themes, we are more focalized now on European security. It should have been intervened Marco Pironi on the city of Turin for smart cities and ICTs, but excuse me, is on the line. Good evening. Hi. Please introduce yourself, because I have no information on your role in Assessorate, but I believe you are part of the staff. Yes, I am part of the staff and innovation team coordinator. I'll leave the floor to you. I believe you have slides. Yes, I have slides. If you want, I will talk about it in English, because we are used to tell these themes in international platforms, and I know that today this platform online is international. I want to communicate that we have the simultaneous translation both in English and in French. So we are speaking Italian for this reason. You will find the slides in English, but it's no problem. Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Participating to this great event. My name is Nicola Faronato. I'm actually a member of the staff of the Deputy Mayor Innovation of the city of Turin. I'm coming from an innovation background, and I'm currently leading the innovation team of the city. So first of all, my contribution today will be around the area of innovation, decline to some use cases about security that we have been developing in strict collaboration with the police of the municipality of Turin in the last 12 months in particular. So I would like to give you a little bit of a context before getting to the use cases. And in particular, I would like to give you a little bit of background about the role of innovation in Turin and in our vision. As you can see from this slide, apart from a very nice picture of Turin by night, there is a payoff, a slogan that we have adopted, speaking about innovation in Turin, which is Turin, the city partner of innovation. The sense of this is about a city which is willing to embrace new emerging technologies, to have an impact, to have a positive impact with the citizens, with the companies, with the other public administrations, and therefore also to have an impact with the different verticals. And for sure, the reason why we are here today is to speak in particular about security, which is a very important vertical that has to do with innovation and that we are using actually to prove that innovation can be positive. First of all, as our chief commander, Dr. Bezzon, said before, innovation is not primarily about technology. Innovation is more connected to a vision, to a culture, and then to the use and combination of technologies for the good results of the city and the good results of the smart city. So in this slide, I'm speaking to you about the vision that Turin has about innovation in the city. So what you see here is in the left side of the slide, a few key numbers about Turin, a little bit less than 1 million people, more or less 10% students, quite a lot of R&D, research and development being done here, and quite a lot of small and medium enterprises, so companies developing innovation in this territory. But the most important thing about this concept is that our vision of a smart city, which connects to a smart city, deploying technology for security reasons, for monitoring its territory, for ensuring that citizens and companies can have better services, can have better reliability in terms of the role of the city, is the concept of smart city. So in our opinion, smart city is the combination of a number of smart districts, a number of smart towns that we have around the city. And the particular relevance of these smart towns is that the city is composed by a number of dots, a number of points of excellence, which typically are districts in which research meets technology and drive innovation. Of course, Turin has a long history and a long background in terms of mobility innovation. So mobility means connected and autonomous cars, connected and autonomous driving, one of the future paradigms of mobility. It means air mobility, beforehand speakers have been mentioning the use of drones. So Turin is a lab city in Italy with regards to drones experimentation, with regards to new standards to be developed in terms of security, for sure, in terms of monitoring the city and the area, in terms of environment, in terms of logistics, so there are different use cases. Mobility for us means also aerospace mobility, so a new dimension that will drive experimentation into the space, starting from Turin. There are a number of very important areas connected to innovation in the city. And one emerging area, which is very horizontal, is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, I would like to point out a couple of facts here. First fact is that artificial intelligence is really a pervasive emerging technology which will have an impact in all the different verticals, including security. And the second fact is that recently Turin has been named by the Italian government as the central hub, as the central laboratory for the future Italian Institute of Artificial Intelligence. So we have a great scope, we have a great opportunity to make artificial intelligence connected with a number of other technologies, also at the service of our security development. So from our understanding, so with our innovation hat, innovation in the smart city can play a very important role with the development of new security projects, of new security use cases and validations. And being part of Actesur is particularly important since the city, as you find written here, is aiming to co-design new models, not just one model, of public spaces monitoring, which means deploying a number of sensors, a number of intelligent and connected objects and tools to retrieve a number of relevant, rich, interesting information and use artificial intelligence, big data analysis, to make reasoning and take better decisions upon that. So I would like to mention, only briefly mention, a few examples, few projects that we have been developing thanks to our innovation department, but also, most importantly, our police department, which has been adopting a number of profiles and know-how in terms of big data analysis and cybersecurity in particular. So the first example I would like to bring to your attention is social media analysis. Social media in the last 10 plus years has been a great trend in which you can detect some key informations, even if there is a lot of noise, a lot of data available. So a lot of data, the so-called big data or giga data, generates a lot of costs in processing those data. That's why artificial intelligence and all these emerging technologies are very important to be used and deployed for a city and for a smart city, to be able to look for patterns, look for pieces of information, sometimes small pieces of information, able to prevent maybe a bad story to happen or able to prevent a problem for the city. So social media lab and social media analysis is certainly something that the city has been working towards. We know, or we give for granted, that social media and big data generates the possibility to provide a decision maker, either way, the mayor, the deputy mayor, or the head chief police officer, and so forth, with tools and visualization of data, able to understand almost in real time issues about urban security. The second example, very on purpose to this project, is about IoT connected to artificial intelligence. One of the biggest and also most beautiful square that we have in Turin is called Vittorio Veneto Square. And this is the key area, also connected with Pacta Sur project, in which the city is looking at developing new projects and deploying a set of sensors and smart objects to provide intelligence, data, and useful information to be used in connection to all the devices spread in the city. So one example that is connected to these sensors deployed in the square of Vittorio Veneto actually has been cameras and IoT sensors helping us to keep track, quantitative track in this case, of how many people are in a certain moment in that space on site, the time or the average time spent on site, and therefore be able to matchmake those informations to generate some interesting visualizations. Camera and the data coming from observation and from images are very important, of course, for all cities, also for Turin, as you can imagine. There are quite a few use cases that we have been developing about cameras detecting people and traffic. Of course, these in connection with the plans of adoption of the city are very powerful tools along with image recognition and the semantic layer associated to that, to make some reasoning on different ways to capture those images. The way, at least two very important ways to capture those images are associated with IoT on field, so connected to positioned in the square or in the specific road, street of the city. There is also smart devices connected to urban air mobility. As I was mentioning before, for the city of Turin, even if it's quite challenging every time to have all the permits to deploy those experimentations, urban air mobility and therefore the use of drones also for monitoring and controlling specific situations and conditions by day and by night, outdoor and indoor also, Turin is a laboratory city in Italy, and I suppose not only because we have quite a lot of international connections with that. Therefore, drones are very important sensors, emotions, when we speak about detecting and collecting pieces of information with the image recognition. Few visualizations, of course, are associated with a few projects that we have been running also during the lockdown, the recent lockdown, so a few months ago. The use cases here have been pretty much connected with monitoring quite extended and big green areas like parks, and the presence of people in specific timing of day or night to make sure that the drone image captured can be eventually given to our local police for some further checks and some further controls when needed. One last example, of course, is connected with the use of IoT and smart devices for capturing informations connected with the restrictions imposed by the COVID-19 emergency. Of course, speaking about different sensors and emerging technologies used for security reasons in a smart city means making sure that we are considering a very important challenge, which is the security and therefore the cybersecurity challenge. Within our police department, there is a specific cybersecurity team within the city partners of innovation, we have quite strong collaborations with the tech companies, very important tech companies internationally, for cybersecurity. Therefore, cybersecurity, also as part of artificial intelligence, is a very important trade union, is a very important factor that needs to be taken in due consideration. So this was wanted to be just a few remarks about the vision of the city and the innovation vision of the city, emerging technology, culture, and cybersecurity to make a better impact on the citizens' security and the urban monitoring and controlling, especially in certain conditions. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Thank you very much, dear Nicola, for this presentation for all different technological districts of the city of Turin. Of course, we would like to greet also City Councillor Pieronti. I just wanted to ask the direction here, the technical direction, and the guests here together with me, if there are questions for Nicola, for Ranto, or maybe if we also questions from the live streaming, or maybe also questions for Edoardo Mattiello, or maybe for all those who have spoken before me. I see somebody here in the video. It's probably a question, but I do not see the video. This is a director of ENG Piemonte. That's what they tell me. We do not hear you. Good evening. I do not know if you hear me. Yes, we can hear you very clear, loud and clear, very well. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to also thank you for being partner of this important project. I'd like to submit some considerations, and I have also a question for this afternoon session's speakers. I'd like to thank them for their presentation and for their precise points of view. My consideration is as follows. In the pandemic experience, we have learned different things that somehow can bring together the health emergency with the terrorist emergency. For example, the fact that the virus, just like a terrorist attack, is invisible until it appears. Or maybe the fact that it's impacted large urban centers much more than rural areas. Just like a terrorist threat, terrorist attack that tends to strike places where there are more people. These two features that combine these two phenomena have taught us, have shown us, for example, that the power, central or local public power, has learned how to use these new communication channels for their citizens, not only through the traditional mass media, so TV and radio, but also social networks or new communication platforms, just like the one we've been using now during this week, that they were not so much used before. So public powers have developed a kind of learning process. This was very quick, swift, and efficient from the communication viewpoint. But during this health emergency, there were problems, especially in the concrete operationality of these measures. The chief of the local police of Turin has already mentioned that. The municipality association that is considering the whole regional territory has really identified in the last months that the management of freedom restriction measures has been particularly complex. The operational aspects were particularly different in Piedmont, but not only in Piedmont, but also in some other European areas. Piedmont is, as a matter of fact, very much fragmented and also divided into very small municipalities. My question now, in the light of my consideration, is what is the right level of cooperation amongst municipalities in order to face this current emergency, or maybe in case of a terrorist emergency? Thank you. Probably we are going to collect some comments. Probably I'll break the ice before the director of ENG. I think the director of ENG would like to have a positive answer for intercommunal cooperation levels. I tell you one thing. We have learned a lot, and I hope we still learn many different things. I hope I will not learn them during an emergency. I've learned that rules are compliant with if they are well explained and minimally shared. If I know that the rule is good, this is not a problem for me to comply with this kind of rule. So this is a kind of educational aspect. This must be focused on some particular areas. And then we have to talk about controls. Cannot be possible that the control levels are so much differentiated between small, medium, and large cities, because this, of course, generates confusion, irritation, and probably also kind of rejection to such rules. Therefore, it's significant to have a synergies between the head cities, medium-sized towns, and smaller towns too, from the point of view of educational information sharing, and also from the point of view of controls. I wish to have a model for all local state police departments, going beyond all this kind of local. During this kind of crisis and during this kind of emergency situation, I think it's of paramount importance to have authorities or mayor that disseminate and disclose information in a particular way. So, I'm not an expert there, but, I've been dealing a lot of things. There are some terms, there are some expressions that define burning, and are particularly fundamental to have then a kind of proactive message, a proactive approach in managing the crisis. So therefore, the mayor, that is actually the person that is meeting the citizens' needs, is aware of such techniques and knows how to face a problem in order to make it understood. As Mr. Bezzoni was saying, why some rules need to be complied with, what we need to do, what we do not want to do, the do's and the don'ts, what we want to do, what we must be scared of or not. I saw some messages that were spreading too much fear amongst people so that they follow the rules. But on the other side, there was some other news that were just watering down the content of such news. I think that for some people this is quite easy, and for some others it's going to be a bit harder. But we need to have a kind of balance in this kind of context. We need to have a kind of special training to communication in case of emergency situations, and therefore we need to have an essential capability to disclose and analyze information. The municipality of Turin will have much more experts than a small municipality, and therefore we will be able to compare information and to find shared and common information in a very clear and one-way communication. Mr. Benita wanted to answer this question too. I share Chief Bezzone's answer. So mayors need to, of course, share information. They needed to summarize this information. Of course, we are a country of thousands of authorities, so sometimes it's not easy to step back vis-à-vis institutions. I think that in this health emergencies, mayors have also proven their capacity to go beyond their little town. They have shown us that mayors normally work very alone. I'm going to suggest you a very good Roberto Balzani's book published by Molino. He's been Forlì's mayor for 5 years, university professor. He had no mayor's experience. So then after 5 years of mayor mandate, he wrote 5 years of loneliness, memories of a mayor. And so he shared a particular topic, so the difficulty to make a decision when you're alone in a room. This is something that concerns many different mayors, but many other officials and officers. I think that the chief of the local police of Turin may tell us something similar. The problem is here to go beyond this kind of loneliness, but also to find the possibility to make decisions. These must be shared and shareable decisions. So we have to have the courage to copy from our neighboring towns. If there are consistent decisions by the public administration, if we copy them and we take them into our town, would be a very good thing. So we need to have the courage to make a decision that is exactly the same one, just like our neighbor, and no matter if he has made this decision before you. Yes, this is a wonderful lesson that you are going to show us in order to close the first afternoon session. There's a question here, I think, by Martina Varodas, by the European Network for Urban Security, has a question for the city of Turin. I'd like to know what are the measures that the city has taken to protect privacy in his citizens. I do not know if Mr. Bezzoli, as chief of the local police of Turin, can answer that. Very quickly, yes, I can give you an answer. The privacy regulation on our country is very complex and articulated. The city does not have a direct control on the private managed tools. This is made by the guarantor of privacy at national level. As for our surveillance devices, we have a higher guarantee because these images are particularly and absolutely protected and used only for security or for police investigations, or for the crime commission, or for identification needs in case of disorders, riots, or crimes. And the manage of such images from capture to the archives from the filing is made only by police officers. This is the highest guarantee, so which means people that process such images, but also then the aims, the goals for such images. This is particularly significant because we have somebody coming from the judicial system that is monitoring the whole process. This is absolutely essential. I do not know if there are other questions from Zoom or maybe from the chat. Probably not. doesn't look like. So if there are no other particular comments, or maybe if there's any other counter answer, counter reply by somebody else. So if there are no other remarks by the participants here or by Marco Orlando, I would say that even if we are ahead of time, so probably we can close this first Monday session, and we're going to meet tomorrow morning and the next days. We have a calendar, we have a timetable that is also available on the website pactosurtorino.eu. I'd like to thank, of course, all those who have participated, all those who have organized the technical staff as well that have made possible this very complex live streaming and call conference at the same time. I'd like to thank also the guests that we have received here, even if they are outside our city, and all those who have been so patient to follow us even from far away. And I'd like also to wish all the best to all of you and enjoy your evening.